Chapter 19. The Colonial System of Imperialism. Role of the colonies in the period of imperialism. Colonialism's transformation. Colonialism existed before imperialism, but under imperialism, it becomes a tool for monopolists to secure resources, export capital, and gain strategic advantages. Economic unification through enslavement. Capitalism's global expansion leads to economic interconnectedness, but under imperialism, this is achieved through the enslavement and exploitation of colonies. World system of oppression. Imperialism creates a global capitalist system where a few, advanced, countries financially strangle and oppress the majority of the world's population. Two camps. The world is divided into imperialist oppressors and the oppressed colonial and dependent countries fighting for freedom. The colonial system. This system encompasses all the colonies and dependent countries enslaved by imperialist states, established through conquest, plunder, and violence. Exacerbating contradictions. While colonial exploitation provides profits to bribe some workers and temporarily alleviate internal contradictions, it ultimately intensifies the contradictions within the capitalist system as a whole. Colonies as agrarian and raw material appendages of the metropolitan countries. Colonies as prime investment hubs. Imperialists see colonies as the most profitable places to invest capital, enjoying a monopoly and reaping high profits. Undermining pre-capitalist forms. Finance capital disrupts traditional economies in colonies, forcing them into capitalist modes of production. Retarding development. While imperialists build some infrastructure, they actively hinder the development of heavy industry and independent economies in colonies. This keeps them dependent and exploitable. Forced agrarianism. Colonies are deliberately kept as agrarian and raw material appendages, supplying cheap resources to the imperial powers. Monoculture dependence. Many colonies are forced to specialize in one or two export products, making them vulnerable to market fluctuations and exploitative trade practices. Strategic raw materials. Colonies are crucial sources of raw materials, especially those vital for war industries, leading to fierce competition among imperial powers. Exploitative markets. Imperialists manipulate colonial markets to sell their goods at inflated prices, while buying raw materials cheaply, resulting in unequal trade and massive profits. Cheap labor and cannon fodder. Colonies provide a source of extremely cheap labor and are even used to supply soldiers for imperial wars. Exacerbated contradictions. This ruthless exploitation of colonies creates a deep conflict between the needs of the colonial economies and the imperialists' greed. Methods of colonial exploitation of the working masses. Hybrid exploitation. Imperialist powers maximize profits by combining their own extractive practices with pre-existing feudal structures and forced labor in the colonies. This ensures a highly exploitable and impoverished workforce. Class structure. Colonial societies are dominated by feudal landlords, comprador bourgeoisie, who collaborate with imperialists, and a nascent national bourgeoisie with conflicting interests. Land ownership and peasant exploitation. Land ownership is concentrated in the hands of landlords and colonizers, with peasants often landless or forced into sharecropping and debt bondage. This leads to primitive agricultural practices, soil depletion, and widespread hunger. Worker exploitation. Colonial workers face long hours, unsafe conditions, extremely low wages, and debt slavery. Forced labor is common. Poverty and degradation. The combined effects of economic backwardness, resource extraction, and extreme exploitation result in widespread poverty, high mortality rates, and a decline in living standards for the colonized people. Slavery and racial discrimination. Shockingly, slavery and racial discrimination are still prevalent in some colonies, further highlighting the brutal nature of imperial rule. The national liberation struggle of the colonial peoples. Expansion of the national question. Imperialism expands the national question beyond Europe, linking it with the struggle of colonized people against foreign domination. It becomes a global fight for emancipation. Revolutionary struggle. The only way for oppressed people to achieve true freedom is through a revolutionary struggle against imperialism. Diverse colonial realities. Colonial and dependent countries vary in their economic development and the size of their working class, leading to different forms of national liberation movements. Peasant-based movements. Since most colonized populations are peasants, national liberation movements are often rooted in peasant struggles against imperialism and feudalism. United Front Against Imperialism. The working class in developed countries and the national liberation movements in colonies share a common enemy, imperialism. A united front is necessary for victory. Internationalism and self-determination. True proletarian internationalism supports the right of oppressed nations to self-determination and independence. Weakening imperialism. The growing national liberation struggles weaken imperialism and pave the way for its eventual downfall.